Today, I'm going to tell you about a man named Caleb Turner and the 72 hours he spent alone in a fire lookout tower that shouldn't have had a second occupant. If dark, true, and unexplained stories are your thing, you're exactly where you need to be. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's get into it. Caleb was 29, a seasonal fire lookout for the U.S. Forest Service, stationed in a remote stretch of the Cascade Range in Washington state. It was his third season doing this job. Most people couldn't handle it. No cell signal, no neighbors, nothing but 40 miles of pine trees in every direction and a wooden tower 14 feet off the ground. But Caleb liked the silence. Or at least, he thought he did. The tower he was assigned to that year wasn't his usual one. His regular post had been damaged by a storm, so the Forest Service reassigned him to an older lookout, one that had been decommissioned for nearly a decade before being reopened due to budget cuts and a dry summer. The Rangers called it Station 14. Caleb didn't think much of that. It was just a number. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon by mule train, the same way supplies had been delivered to fire towers for over 100 years. The ranger who dropped him off, a quiet older man named Dale, helped him carry up his gear, then paused at the base of the stairs. "You know this place has history, right?" Dale said. Caleb shook his head. He didn't. Dale hesitated, like he wanted to say more, then just shrugged. "Radio checks in every 6 hours. Don't miss one." Then he left. Caleb didn't think about that conversation again. Not until the second night. First night was uneventful. He unpacked, tested his radio, cooked dinner on his small propane stove, and watched the sun disappear behind the ridgeline in that particular orange the Cascades are known for. He wrote in his logbook, like he always did. Then he went to sleep. He woke up at 2:47 a.m. There was no sound, no movement, just an overwhelming sense that he wasn't alone. He sat up in the dark and looked around the small room. Nothing, the windows, and a fire lookout has windows on all 4 sides, that's the whole point, showed nothing but black trees and stars. Then he saw it. On the far window, on the inside of the glass, someone had written something in the condensation. 3 words, "They're still here." Caleb hadn't written that. He was the only person in the tower. He didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, he checked the door. Still locked. He checked the trapdoor beneath the tower, the only other way in. Still bolted from the inside. He told himself it was a trick of the light, or maybe he'd written it himself in his sleep. Some kind of night terror thing. He'd read about people doing strange things while unconscious. It was possible. At the noon radio check, he almost told Dale about it. Almost. But something stopped him. Maybe pride. Maybe fear of sounding insane on an open channel that other rangers could hear. So he said everything was fine. That afternoon, while scanning the horizon with his binoculars for smoke, as he was trained to do every 20 minutes, he noticed something odd about the forest below. A single trail cutting through the trees that shouldn't have existed. It wasn't on any of his maps. It led toward an old ranger cabin nearly 2 miles away, one that had been marked as abandoned since the 1980s. He almost convinced himself to hike out and check it. Almost. But lookouts aren't supposed to leave their post except in emergencies, and this didn't feel like one. Not yet. That night, the radio crackled at 9:12 p.m. Static, mostly. Then, for just a moment, a voice came through. Not Dale's. Not any voice he recognized. A young woman, speaking so quietly he had to strain to hear, still counting the days. Then, nothing. He tried to raise the station on the emergency channel, no response. He didn't sleep that night either. By the 3rd morning, Caleb had made a decision he now regrets, but at the time felt necessary. He climbed down from the tower to investigate the cabin he'd seen through his binoculars. He told himself it was still within his patrol radius. He told himself a lot of things that morning. The hike took nearly 90 minutes through dense undergrowth that hadn't been cleared in years. When he finally found the cabin, it was worse than he expected. The structure had partially collapsed, half swallowed by moss and roots, but the door was somehow still intact, and it was open. Inside, he found something that made his blood run cold. A logbook, not unlike his own, sitting on a rotted wooden table, its pages swollen with decades of moisture. He opened it carefully, and the last legible entry, dated almost exactly 10 years earlier, was written in handwriting that grew progressively worse across the page, as if the writer's hand had been shaken. The entry read, in part, about someone hearing footsteps on the stairs of the lookout tower every night at the same time. Footsteps that never reached the top. It mentioned a name Caleb didn't recognize, and it ended mid-sentence. Caleb closed the book. His hands were shaking too now. That's when he noticed the second thing. Carved into the wooden wall beside the table, dozens of tally marks. Hundreds, maybe. Someone had been counting days. And beneath the tallies, barely visible, 3 words scratched into the wood. They're still here. The exact same words from his window. Caleb ran back to the tower. He doesn't remember most of the run. He just remembers arriving, soaked in sweat, slamming the trapdoor shut behind him, and sitting with his back against it for nearly an hour, listening to his own heartbeat. At the 3 p.m. radio check, Dale's voice finally came through clearly. Caleb almost cried with relief. He told Dale everything. The writing, the voice, the cabin, the logbook. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Dale said something Caleb has never forgotten. Station 14 was shut down in 2016. There was an incident. We were told never to send anyone back there alone. Another pause. I didn't know they reopened it. I'm coming to get you. Dale said it would take him until morning to reach the tower on foot, since the mule train couldn't travel at night through that terrain. Caleb would have to make it through one more night alone. He tried to stay awake. He really did. He sat by the radio with every light in the tower on, listening to the wind move through the trees below. For hours, nothing happened. He started to believe maybe it really had all been in his head. Stress, isolation. The mind plays tricks when it's alone long enough. Around 1 a.m., the wind stopped completely. Not slowed. Stopped. As if the entire forest had gone silent at once, the way it does right before something happens. And then he heard it. Footsteps. On the stairs outside. Slow, deliberate climbing toward the top. Caleb grabbed the only thing near him, a heavy flashlight, and backed against the far wall, watching the trapdoor. The footsteps stopped just below it. He counted 14 steps up to the tower. He'd only heard 13. Silence. He stood there for what felt like an hour, though it was probably only minutes, waiting for the trapdoor to move. It never did. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and somewhere around 4 a.m., without meaning to, he fell asleep, sitting upright against the wall. He woke to sunlight and the sound of Dale's voice calling up from the base of the tower. It was over. Dale helped him pack his things in near silence, both of them avoiding the subject until they were well down the trail, putting distance between themselves and Station 14. Caleb felt lighter with every step. Whatever had happened up there, it was behind him now. Then, halfway back to the main station, Dale stopped walking. "Wait," he said. "Your logbook. Did you bring it?" Caleb had. He always kept careful records. It was required. He pulled it from his bag and handed it over instinctively. Dale flipped through the pages, his face growing paler with each one. "Caleb," he said quietly. "You wrote in this every night. All 3 nights." "Yeah, I always do." Dale turned the book around so Caleb could see it. The entries for the first night and the third night were in Caleb's normal handwriting, but the second night's entry, the night of the window message, was written in a different hand entirely. Cramped, shaky, nothing like his own. It was a full page, describing in detail counting days on a wall and something climbing the stairs every night that never reached the top. Just like the abandoned cabin's logbook, word for word in places. Caleb had no memory of writing it. At the bottom of the page, beneath the entry, was a final line, written in that same unfamiliar hand. 13 steps means it's not done counting yet. Caleb never went back to fire lookout work. He transferred to a desk position with the Forest Service the following season and hasn't spent a night alone in the wilderness since. Station 14 was permanently decommissioned less than a month after his shift ended. The official report cited structural concerns, but Caleb still keeps that logbook. And every few months, without explanation, he finds the same 3 words written somewhere new. The fogged bathroom mirror, the frost on his car windshield, once, impossibly, on the inside of his own front door. They're still here. He still hasn't figured out what they were counting toward, or what happens when they finally reach the top.